A nice 30-minute game of chess that you can fall asleep to. If you don't know how to play chess, that's okay. You'll probably be asleep in like 2 minutes. If you do know how to play chess, you can follow along with my thought process and learn something. I'm Nelson. I'm a national chess master, by the way. Let's go ahead and get started. So e5, we're going to play knight f3, which attacks the pawn on e5. Gets ready to castle eventually here. And of course, knight to c6 defends. Typical move that we would expect to see here. I think I'm going to play the Ponziani, but I could also play the Italian game here. I do like the Ponziani, so let's play c3. The drawback of this move is we don't have the square for our knight, and black actually takes advantage of that by playing d5, because normally we could capture here and gain a tempo on the queen. But in this case, we can't because we've moved our pawn there. But what we can do against d5 is play queen to a4, pinning the knight, creating an attack on e5. A couple of ways that black could defend this would be f6. I've seen bishop d7. It's kind of a gambit if you want to just give up this pawn. Also, knight g to e7. I think queen to d6 is even a move. Quite a few different approaches here from black. We'll see what our opponent wants to do. Their name does have stockfish in it, so it's a little bit scary, but we'll see. I don't recognize this flag. Somalia. Bishop d7. Yeah, this is the gambit line that I mentioned, so called a Caro gambit. But basically, black is abandoning this pawn here and allowing us to simply capture it. I believe we have to take that. Maybe bishop b5 is also a potential move, but after a6, I don't really think that makes a whole lot of sense. Because if we take, we lose another tempo there. So I think most likely we do have to accept this. I wonder if queen b3 is another move. Trying to take advantage of this, but I think let's go ahead and accept the gambit. Black's going to play knight to d4, yeah, and you can see the bishop now is attacking our queen. So of course we can't take the knight or we lose the queen. So I believe we have to go back. There's also a threat here, knight to c2, which is a fork. And so the only real move that defends the fork and also saves our queen is queen to d1. Unless, of course, we want to sacrifice the queen for 2 pieces, but that doesn't really make sense. So let's go back. Black does take our knight, and we don't want double isolated pawns. We're going to recapture with the queen here. Knight to f6 puts pressure here. It is temporarily defended, but I think we do have to watch out for e4. Played this quite a few times. I believe what I normally play is c4 here and get the knight on c3. I wonder if there's another approach. Maybe bishop to c4 and castling right away. Bring the rook to the center, try to play d4. It's not a bad idea as well. So it's a question of which approach do we want to take here. I think I will play c4. I like just really supporting that pawn. We'll try to be greedy and just hold on to it. Knight to c3. Then we have to figure out where we want to put the bishops and which direction we're going to castle. I believe bishop e7, bishop d6, bishop c5 are probably all relatively fine moves for black. So we'll see what they're going to do. This is a relatively new account, created February 11th of 2024. It scares me a little bit, to be completely honest with you, but c6. So if we take this, black might recapture, gaining a tempo and has 2 pieces developed. I have no pieces developed. I don't really like the look of that. If I play knight to c3, after the capture, we could actually just take back with the knight, and maybe I could avoid the double isolated pawns. Double isolated pawns, usually not something that you want. So let me actually do knight to c3. I don't know this theory, so I don't know if this is the book move or not, but it seems like a logical try. Gets the knight off the back. defends the pawn on d5. Bishop b4, threatening my knight on c3, which is also indirectly putting pressure on the d5 pawn. Now, of course, we can capture here on c6, and I would expect black to recapture here, gaining a tempo. My other option would be to simply chase this bishop away, force the capture, and after this, we take back this way. Also, would leave me with no doubled pawns. However, in that situation, there's going to be this move e4. And then I have to retreat to d1 if I want to try to hold on to my pawn. But that looks okay, actually. So maybe a3 is a playable move here. Otherwise, what can I do? If I don't want to force the issue with that trade, maybe just developing. I wonder if bishop to d3 makes sense. Takes. It stops e4. It seems like a decent place for the bishop. I do lose the option to push this pawn forward. I don't know how big of a deal that is. So maybe we want to play bishop to d3. If they take straight away, then we could still jump in with the knight. Takes. I think that's okay. It's possible that I'm missing something. I don't see it. Also, the idea of just clarifying the situation here is nice because it allows this bishop to have options. Otherwise, this bishop could get stuck. I believe it's a toss-up between a3 and bishop to d3. I really don't know what the best move is. I think I do want to clarify some of this, so I'm leaning towards a3. Let me go ahead and play that. Of course, black is most likely going to take my knight here, in which case I'll recapture with the d-pawn. Notice we both have 30 minutes, so this could last a full hour. Although at the rate that my opponent is playing, that seems unlikely. They have not spent very long on any move up to this point. They are thinking a bit now, which is a bit odd, but maybe they don't actually want to give up the bishop, which would be surprising to me, but I suppose they could retreat. Bishop a5, maybe bishop e7, bishop d6. Both of these squares, however, seems like it would allow b4, and I could gain some space with the tempo on the bishop. So I would imagine we see a capture here. Queen to a5 is actually another interesting move, pinning the pawn here and preventing the capture of the bishop because the rook on a1 would be undefended. Very interesting move, which also gives black the option to castle either direction. I wonder if we will see that move. No, black decides to go ahead and trade on c3. Okay. Like I mentioned, I believe I want to simply capture this way and unleash my bishop. The idea is that after takes, I no longer have doubled pawns, and on e4 we could retreat the queen to d1 and defend that way. Let's just see if it makes sense to do anything else, but I don't think so. I'm going to capture with the d-pawn. Now black castles kingside, and I do want to be careful that my king doesn't get stuck in the center and under attack from black's rook. Now, right now, the pawn is in the way, which is actually doing me a favor. I don't have to worry about this at the moment. d6 looks interesting, because if we can get c5 and b4, we have a very nice long pawn chain with a passed pawn already. The issue is that pawn going to become weak? Is it going to become a target for black's pieces? And am I really going to be able to hold on to it? The other issue is, do I have time to do that without developing my pieces? Bishop to g5 seems like a very logical move, pinning the knight. And I don't know how black's going to deal with that. If they try to come over here to attack on b2, we might be able to take. Looks like it would get pretty wild in that situation. Maybe I would just castle. But then the knight's no longer pinned and it can move somewhere. Again, leading to some interesting positions. So d6, bishop g5, or even bishop d3 seem to be candidate moves. Bishop g5, Queen to b6. Castles queenside. Takes. 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 Notice the queen's defending. Takes this way. There might be a rook lining up on my king, but I do have it defended. I like the look of that. Let's just check. Any blunders? Bishop g4, e4? I don't think so. Bishop g5 is what I'm going to do. And we do see queen b6 straight away. Okay. Castle's queenside to defend. Takes, takes. Pretty happy with that. If I take right away, queen takes here. What happens on queen to g3, threatening checkmate? We lose a rook, we can move our king. g6. I don't think we have time to deliver the checkmate. Looks like our king is going to be chased around by black's queen. I think we need to castle queenside. There's also b4, which is not totally out of the question, but I think I would rather get my king out of the center. And now my rook is involved, supporting the d-pawn, which might become a pass pawn in the near future. Castle's queenside. Does black have any good moves? The knight could move somewhere, but where? Back to e8. Doesn't seem very good. Other than that, e4, I simply can move my queen somewhere. I believe castling queenside must be the move. Let's go ahead and do it. And as soon as I played it, I just noticed bishop to g4. I just noticed bishop to g4. We may have walked into that one. Bishop to g4 is an annoying move because it's a skewer. When the queen moves, I'm going to lose my rook. Definitely should have thought through that. However, there is queen to g3 takes, bishop takes f6. So we might have a way out of that. Although, to be fair, I should have calculated this first. Bishop g4, I think queen g3 would probably save us. Maybe there's some knight moves that we need to consider, but the problem with the knight moves is that the bishop on g4 would then be undefended. And black does play bishop g4. So we're going to get to see this line most likely. Queen to g3. As a reminder, on bishop takes rook, bishop takes f6 will threaten checkmate on g7. After something like g6, you could simply take the bishop. Now, it's not that clear cut because the queen is still going to invade, and the position is unclear. But as a general rule, 2 pieces for a rook is a good trade for me. I would be better off taking the pieces. Now, the other thing that we need to discuss is, does black have any other moves besides taking my rook? For example, knight to e4, I believe, like I mentioned, we take here. But there is knight takes f2 with a triple fork on both of my rooks and my queen. Of course, I would want to save the queen. Let's just say queen, maybe f3. If we lose this rook, we could play bishop e3, trapping the knight, and probably g3 and taking the knight. Very interesting position. Knight to h5 also is no good. We simply take. Are there any other moves for black that I didn't consider? Takes, takes. Doesn't have time for queen b3 and checkmate because I would checkmate first. I think queen g3 is the only move I can play, really. Nothing else really makes sense. So let's go ahead and play queen g3. I'm expecting probably either knight to e4 or bishop takes d1, and black plays bishop takes d1 immediately. Okay, well, like I mentioned, bishop takes f6 will threaten the checkmate, and I believe we would see g6 at that point. Then I could take the bishop. You could also play queen h4, trying to sneak in, or maybe even queen g5, trying to sneak in for a checkmate this way. But on queen g5, queen b3, I wonder if I'm getting checkmated first. Now, I would have bishop to d3. Maybe I would be okay. And can black stop the checkmate? If the rook moves, that doesn't really help him. Yeah, very interesting position. So regardless, I think bishop takes f6 is the correct move. Because even if I'm not able to get a checkmate on g7, I'm still going to be able to take the bishop on d1. Let's go ahead. Bishop takes f6, threatening the immediate checkmate on g7. And we do see an immediate g6 played by our opponent. Now, as I mentioned, we have two plans. King takes d1, or queen to g5, trying to go to h6 and g7 for the checkmate. If we go for queen to g5, it's always good to start with checkmates. If we go for queen to g5, how can black stop us? You cannot move the king. You can move the rook somewhere, but that doesn't help you because after queen to h6, you have no way to stop g7. This rook also cannot help. This pawn can move, but it doesn't help because in any case, we would still go queen h6 and queen g7. This pawn cannot move, this pawn cannot move. This pawn can move, but it doesn't prevent the checkmate. This pawn can move or capture, and now I see a potential idea. Capturing here actually unleashes the queen to attack our bishop, which is a relatively big problem because if we now play queen h6, black simply takes our bishop, and we have no more checkmate. So c takes d5 seems to be the saving move for black if I play queen g5. Of course, there's another pawn that doesn't do anything. A queen, which can move to a couple of places. Actually, queen takes f2 is another variation of the same idea. Queen takes f2, puts pressure on the bishop, and if my queen tries to move, I no longer have support of the bishop, and there's no checkmate to follow. So there's two problems that I would have to solve if I'm going to play queen to g5. Okay. The other option, of course, is just king takes d1, maybe allowing black's queen to infiltrate on b2. That is also a very interesting position after something like bishop d3. There could be queen a1 check, I move my king, and I lose a rook in the corner. But then I could play queen g5. And the question then becomes, does the queen have any way to stop checkmate? Queen takes h2. Okay, so maybe I could play queen h4 instead to prevent that. On h5, queen g5, queen h6, and queen g7 would probably lead to checkmate. So this is a very interesting position, and I'm actually thinking about going for this line of sacking my rook if black will go for it. King takes d1, followed by queen takes b2, bishop to d3, queen to a1 check, king to d2, queen takes h1, and queen to h4. There's also queen to g1, which is a very interesting move because on queen to g1 after queen h6, there's a check here, which happens to be a fork on my bishop, which is a very annoying move if you think about it. So very complicated position. I'm leaning towards still taking the bishop, and I don't actually have to sack the rook. But maybe there's another way to do it. Maybe takes, bishop there, check. Maybe I can go king to e2 when I sacrifice it, so that after this happens, on queen to h4, let's just say queen to g1. There is no fork on f2 because my king is now defending it. And then we have the whole checkmate idea that we talked about previously. That seems to be the way to go. I think I'm comfortable enough taking on d1. Let me just check one more move here. C takes d5, because c takes d5 unleashes the queen and also potentially opens up my king, which is not something that I thought about. So king takes d1, c takes d5. What move would we play next? We have to defend the bishop. So maybe bishop takes e5, takes, and we plant the bishop on d4. Still a wild position, and I really don't know what's even happening. Well, regardless, I think the decision needs to be to take the bishop on d1, and we'll try to figure out the rest from there, although this is turning into a very complicated position. I'm going to go for king takes d1. And we do see queen takes b2 right away. Our opponent is playing very quickly and confidently. Let's analyze what happens on bishop to d3. Let's say that our opponent goes for the rook sacrifice, queen a1 check. We could play king to e2. They take the rook, and we play queen to h4, attempting queen h6 and queen g7 with an unstoppable checkmate. Queen takes g2, queen h6, queen to g4 check. We would be able to play f3, queen to g2 check. We would be able to play king to e1, queen to g1 check. We could play bishop to f1. And finally, we've avoided the checks, and I believe black has no way to stop the checkmate. So I'm feeling confident about that. The other approach would be to play something like queen g5 straight away. Don't even try to sacrifice the rook. But in that particular case, I'm worried that we won't be able to get away from the checks. Queen b1 check, king to e2, queen to c2 check, king to f3, queen takes check, and I feel like my king is having to run to g4, check, king to h3. Wow, that is a very, very scary thing to do. That being said, it looks very difficult for black to stop the checkmate. So queen to g5 and bishop to d3 are both decent options. The nice thing about bishop to d3 is I can use this bishop to help support my king. However, I think we need to revisit queen to g5. Queen to g5. If black tries to move the rook, we play here. That doesn't really help them avoid the checkmate. So most likely we are going to see a check from the queen in one of three places. 1, 2, or 3. b1, a1, or b3. Now after queen g5, queen to b1 check, I would play king to e2. There's also queen to e4 check, which I am just now noticing, which is not what I want. That would force me to go back. No, actually I could go to d2. Queen to then there's queen to f4, and it's a forced queen trade. Now, it's not the end of the world because I would still have the bishop pair, but I would want to try to avoid that if possible. So let's think if there's another way to do this. What if we just go straight up to d2? And on b2, then we play to e3. On takes, we go bishop to d3. On queen here, we go back to e2. And queen to b2, we go over to f3. I do believe we would be able to get away from the checks. So now I'm leaning towards queen g5. We don't even really need to sacrifice the rook. We just play queen g5, run with our king. Depending on how black wants to check us, we run with our king in different directions. And eventually we get away and we deliver the checkmate. Because the rooks are in no position to stop this checkmate. The pawns are in no position. It's only the queen. Black's queen. Let's play queen to g5. I think it's our best chance to win this game. If I've missed something, I've missed something. Queen to g5. Now I would expect our opponent to think a bit on where the correct check is. They have queen to a1, queen to b1, and queen to b3. Basically, my plan is going to be avoid the checks and at the same time not allow black to trade queens, which is easier said than done. Chooses queen to b3. Now, I have the option to go with d2 or e2. If we go to d2, there's check, king to e3, queen takes c3. There's also queen to c1, which would force the queen trade that I'm trying to avoid. On king to e2, there's two checks that I would probably be worried about. On queen to c4, king to f3, there is a forced queen trade. But I can't avoid that, can I? I don't believe so. I don't believe we can actually avoid that queen trade. That's unfortunate. So king to d2, check, king to e3. There's also this one, like I mentioned. King here, takes, king here, takes, king here, queen f4, and I'm losing quite a few pawns in the process, which is not ideal. So maybe I do have to accept the fact there's going to be a queen trade, and how can I not lose too many pawns in the process? King to d2, check. King to d3 is another way to do it, check. King to e3, check. King to e4, check on c2. I could block with the bishop. Yeah, maybe that's the best way to do it. I could be missing something, as this is a very complicated position, but I think we need to go with king to d2. And unfortunately, I missed this idea of queen coming back here, forcing the trade. That being said, we do have the two bishops against the rook, which generally speaking is a good trade for me. Two bishops usually can outperform the rooks. However, if I end up losing too many pawns, that might become a different story, because then the rooks, along with the pawns, could be too powerful for the two bishops. But we'll see how black is going to proceed from this point. Queen to b2 seems like the obvious move, in which case I'll probably go king to d3, although then I allow queen takes f2, which is actually a bit of a problem because it puts the pressure on the bishop, which is something that I want to avoid. That being said, maybe we could play bishop to e2 and rook f1. The other option would be to go to e3. If he takes this pawn, I have bishop to d3. Okay, we do see queen to b2. King here, queen takes f2. Bishop to e2 is interesting because once the rook gets on f1, then the bishop is defended, and I no longer have to worry about that. I can simply go queen h6 and checkmate. So king to d3 does look more appealing. There's still queen to b1 to worry about. King to e3, queen to c1, king to f3, and the trade that we talked about, which we will have to make the best of. I believe king to d3 takes bishop e2 maybe is my best chance. Let's play king to d3. So black has two moves that I would expect to see here. Queen to b1 and queen takes f2. On queen takes f2, bishop to e2 looks reasonable, and on queen to b1, I believe king to e3. Fortunately, like I mentioned, okay, black plays e4 instead. Not even a move that was on my radar. And now we have to calculate again. If we take the pawn, we've allowed the rooks to attack our king, which seems very dangerous. However, it's not totally out of the question. There's also king to d4, and I don't know what black would play. There's no checks with the queen. That's not true. There is a check with the queen. We can also just play king to e3, but there's still that same check. If I take rook e1 check, or rook e8 check, king to f3, and I'm able to escape temporarily because the bishop defends c3. What a wild position. King takes, rook e8, king f3. If we can play g3 and hide over here, or bishop d3 and get the rook involved, that seems reasonable. There's also queen to c2, but I'm not so concerned because of bishop to d3, although then rook e8 check. King here c5 would be an annoying move. We'd probably have to play something like bishop e7. I'm honestly getting lost in this position, and I don't really know what's happening, so maybe king to e3 is just the most straightforward. Queen check, rook e8, king to d4, and I believe there's also c5. I don't really want to have to run that way with my king. So maybe we do just leave the pawn and go king to d4. c5 takes. We can go back here after check, and I think we're surviving. Okay. I believe we can do that. King to e3. Very, very difficult position. Let's play king to e3. With 6 minutes on the clock and no increment, I have to play a little bit faster. Although this is such a complicated position, that's a very difficult thing to do. I'm expecting queen to c1, in which case I think I will not take the pawn, simply for the fact that I don't want the rook on e8 to attack my king. I'll probably play king to d4. Now there is potential for c5, but I believe I could simply take it, and after a rook check, I could come back to d4. Maybe black would play queen takes a3 in that situation, threatening queen c5. And again, it is very unclear what exactly is happening in the position. There's bishop e7, there's simply queen h6, and then can I get away from the checks, which I think maybe I could. But again, very, very complicated and wild position. Queen to c1 seems to be black's best try. However, they could also just take this pawn. The idea is that I can no longer go for checkmate because of the skewer here. So if they take, I probably would have to recapture. And it's still a question of, can I survive in the center of the board here with my king? My opponent plays h6 instead, trying to bait me to capture so that they can skewer the queen, which is actually an interesting idea. Of course, we can't take the pawn. So what does that mean? Well, it means we can play queen h4, we can play queen e5. Queen e5, queen c1, we can actually take, and on rook e8, we could play bishop to e7, followed by d6. Again, it's getting totally wild. Other option could be something like queen f4, queen g3, queen h4. Queen e5, takes. If the rook comes over, I want to play d6 and plant the bishop on e7 just to block off the e-file. I like queen a5 because it gives my king a route to run away over this way, whereas the queen's not going to be in the way. Queen h4 seems like too passive of a square. Queen e5, rook e8. Do I really have time to play bishop e7 is the question. What if takes? Queen check. Again, I'm totally getting lost in this position. I have no idea what's happening. We're going to play queen to e5. We have to try something here. The bailout move on rook to e8 would be something like queen to d4, where we don't actually put my bishop into a pin. We simply go back to d4. Again, I'm still thinking about running with my king over this way, trying to get away from the queen, and at the same time not step into problems from the rooks if I go this way. So king to f4 is a move on my radar. Bishop to e2 also is another move because bishop to e2 would allow the rook to immediately control the first rank and take away a lot of these options that the black queen has. But I don't believe black's going to give me time to do that. I'm expecting rook to e8. Rook to e8. Do I play bishop to e7 or queen to d4? It's not a simple question to answer. After the sacrifice, queen takes c3 looks very dangerous for me. Although that being said, maybe it's not so bad. We could take, we could run. Black's other rook is not really able to come into the action. That being said, queen to d4 looks very reasonable as well. Takes, takes, rook comes over. Again, I have no idea what's happening. Bishop to e7, there's f6, but we would simply take it. That doesn't seem to do anything. Or even queen e6 check. Bishop to e7. And if black tries to get clever with something like queen here, thinking that if takes, takes, I could simply play d6. And if I'm ever able to get d6 defending the bishop on e7, I'm very happy because it shuts down the rooks on both of these files at the same time. I think I will play bishop to e7, assuming we see rook to e8. On queen to c1 check. I don't actually know. Do we take the pawn or do we just go king to d4? There is going to be queen to d2 check, which would force me to take it, or run to c5. If we take it, block on e7. I feel pretty happy about that because we always have d6 to defend the bishop. So I think we can actually get away with taking the pawn on e4. The big question is, how do we get these pieces into the game? That's not easy to do. I also wonder if black has any other moves that could surprise me besides rook to e8 and queen c1 check. I believe that might be what they're thinking about right now. No, we do see queen to c1 check, and I'm going to go ahead and capture the pawn. Like I said, rook to e8 is going to be met with bishop to e7, and I think we are holding on in that position. d6 is a key pawn move to defend the bishop on e7. There's also c takes d5, which can be met really with either c takes d5 or, okay, we do see rook to e8, so bishop to e7 is the only move here. And I'm just noticing actually queen to e1 is a very good move because it skewers and then I lose the bishop. I did not see that move, and I would have no other choice but to play king to d4 or king to f4. Bishop to e2 simply loses a bishop for no reason. Now, I don't believe the game is going to be over, but it's not a good position. I'm going to be down the exchange, although there might be a glimmer of hope. If the bishop can get out, the rook can get involved, and the active placement of my king can help support these pawns. And he actually takes first. That's a very, very smart decision. And now I'm getting skewered and I have no way to stop it. And this is something that I did not consider. I did need to play king to d4, and I should not have taken the pawn. Well, at this point, I think we are in trouble. We have to move our king, and basically we're down a queen for a bishop, which is unfortunate. Let's play king to d4, and I think it's time to resign. This was a very clever idea that I did not see. So I think what we will do is resign and see if our opponent wants a rematch. Just waiting for them to take the queen. We might actually just do a quick review after this because I'm very curious to see. I'm going to go ahead and resign. I'm going to do a game review. Very curious to see if we did have a checkmate or not. Our opponent played with 89.9 accuracy, and our accuracy was 81.2. Here you can see the game review. So not too many mistakes, but there was a few moments. So let's take a look at what happened. Jump to the end of this gambit, and I'm going to see what Stockfish recommended. Knight to c3, bishop to b4, slight inaccuracy, a3. At this point, we had a slight advantage. Castles, bishop g5 was indeed the best move. Queen to b6. Castles was the best move again. Bishop to g4. And queen to g3. So as I said, we did have counterplay, so we must have misplayed this. And let's see. Bishop takes f6. g6. And the move that we needed to play was c5. That is an incredible move, and I don't understand what the idea of playing c5 is. I do not understand that at all. c5, queen takes c5, and then take the bishop. Probably because Stockfish didn't want to allow queen takes b2. That's the only thing that I can think of why we would want to do that. But instead, I took this, allowed queen takes b2, and now it's supposed to be a draw. Let's see, where exactly did we go wrong? So trying to go run up and get away from the checks was the big mistake. Stockfish says if you just go back and forth, it's simply a draw. But by running up, we allowed e4, and still we were okay. h6 was the best move. Queen to e5, queen check. And taking the pawn was the big mistake, and really it came down to the fact that I missed a simple tactic of rook takes e7, followed by the skewer. I thought that I was going to have time to play d6, but that did not happen, and that's why this was a big blunder. Instead, if we simply play king to e2, the game is just a draw, and black has nothing better than a perpetual check. However, if I played king to d4, which was my other consideration, now I'm also losing after rook fe8 because the rooks get involved. And if I try to move my queen somewhere, let's just say to g3, c takes d5, and this is bad news. Big problem here also is that my bishop is pinned to the rook. So very interesting game. We did not play that as well as we could have, but that's what happened. I hope you guys are fast asleep at this point, and I thank you for watching. Stay sharp, play smart, and take care.